Welcome to this next Pirate Monkey painting tutorial. Today we are going to be covering wood. So here's just kind of a quick overview of what we are going to be painting. You guys can see that we have a really nice wood grain texture and some cool glowing streaking effects kind of coming out of it. And that's what it started off like. We're going to be using mainly the Winsor & Newton size 0. That's the Series 7 brush, and there on the palette we have our colors. We have Nightshade Purple, we have Titanium White, and then we have Tanned Skin from Reaper. Obviously we're using a lot of Reaper colors today, mainly because they are very, very matte, and they help us get a textural contrast. Checking the paint there on my thumb. We're going to be using the layering technique here, and we're of course always going to be pushing the paint where we want that little droplet to go, because it's going to give us the best opacity, and it's going to help our blends have a better transition as we go along. With a lot of these, we are going to be going into a time lapse just because it would take too much time to go over every video. The video would be like 40-50 minutes, and I don't want to take that long. You guys can see we added just a touch of that Nightshade Purple to the mix there, and I'm a big advocate of just adding like a little tip of whatever that color is, and then just repeating the same technique. This is a really great place to practice your layering. Is any kind of like paneling or any kind of surface that's not quite small in texture, but just big enough to where you can practice this technique effectively. So it'll really help you build up that muscle memory. Repeating the process. Probably be saying this a lot, but yeah, it's just kind of this very slow, progressive building of layers in the beginning, and that really transfers in the end. And this is a good example of how you don't always have to layer with the pushing. You can also layer just by applying the paint. As long as you're respecting that previous line that you had painted, the layers are still going to be pretty effective. Now, some are going to be more effective than others, and it also just depends on how you feel like painting, to be honest. You don't have to use the best technique every time. You can change up your brushstroke and your technique a little bit here and there just to change it up and break the monotony. And one more dip into black here. We do one or two more mixes here before we really get into just pure Nightshade Purple, and then we'll be working up the other way. So this is our last mix before we get really into like a pure Nightshade Purple. You guys can see it's very, very dark, and we are really going for a very extreme contrast. And you guys kind of know my motto and my philosophy with painting is it's great to take things to an extreme, because you can always come back from that extreme, and it's an important lesson to learn actually, is how to even get to that extreme. And I would really implore that you all practice that kind of in your day-to-day painting, because it's really going to benefit you. If you have to come back and smooth things out with glazes, it's giving you a broader range of contrast after the glazing techniques, and so, it's just something. It's just a good practice, and practicing it on a variety of sizes of things as well is going to be very, very important. And it's going to be important because you're going to encounter a variety of surfaces, so you really can't go wrong. The other thing you'll see here too, that I just want to point out as we jump into this final Nightshade Purple mix, is that I have made a few mistakes. You can kind of see at the bottom ledge of the box, and then on the top corner there, we accidentally got some of that darker color, I'm just leaving that for now, mainly because it's something that I don't need to be too concerned about, as we're going to be going over it with a lighter paint. A couple of coats with that lighter paint is going to cover that right up. So here, essentially, usually what I like to do, and you guys can see this pattern repeat itself quite a few times, is that I will paint a little bit with a thinned out coat, and then I'll get almost pure, like right out of the bottle paste. And essentially, the reason that I'm doing that is I want a little bit more opacity. I want it to be, I want it to fully cover without any kind of in between, and it allows me to do that. And here we are going to be cleaning it up, just kind of getting a little bit of that thin nightshade purple and really making those lines between all the panels very prominent, very distinct, and just beginning to kind of build that contrast. Made a little mistake there. You can just always use your finger. Your fingers are tools as well. Please do not worry about the oils on your fingers. It really gets overblown by a lot of people. They really go crazy about it for some reason, but it's not going to affect your painting. Now we are starting to mix in our tan flesh and our titanium white, and we're going to start to create that lighter mix here. And just testing it on the thumb, just kind of getting a feel for it as always. And then we're going to start to push this in, going in the opposite direction. Speeding it up here. Usually after about 4 or 5 of those little layers initially, I'm going to speed it up for you guys. Mixing back up. So I know this process has become probably a little bit repetitive for you guys, but again, I do feel like it is important to show this, because layering is something that I have talked to quite a few of you guys, quite a few of you Patreons, and it's still kind of confusing you. And so this is a very good place to show it, because these shapes are very, very basic and very generalized, and I can do that for you. But yeah, don't overthink the mixing up too much, and don't overthink the layering process too much. Essentially, it's like what I always talk about. We really just want to create those stair steps to create the transition. And I was streaming on Twitch the other day, and I was explaining to my wife how the layers work, and you can kind of think of it in like a fractional manner, right? If you have block of material, right, and you cut it in half, those two different parts aren't very distinct. But then if you cut each of those two parts in half, then you have 4 parts. And then if you cut all of those in half, then you have 8 parts. And that trend continues and continues. And essentially, the smaller and smaller those parts become, if we're using this analogy for layering and smoothness of transitions, the more of those parts that there are, the smoother the transition will be. The less parts that there are, the more abrupt it'll be, and the more distinct those two separate components will be. And neither one is better or worse than the other, but it's just something to kind of think about as you're layering and as you're glazing and so on and so forth. So okay, and there you guys go. Looking very, very nice. Just kind of showing it to the camera. Now I think we're going to be using just a touch of pure white here. And checking the consistency once again. And we're going to do just a little bit of edge highlighting just to make sure that all of these shapes also have a bright contour to them. The bright contour and the dark contours are both equally important. And you guys are going to see here in just a few moments that we're going to be glazing over and tinting all of these wood panels quite a bit with a lot of color. And so having this extremity in highlights and shadows is really, really going to help us out in the end of the process. Just using the side of the brush there. Being very, very careful. Now just speeding it up just a touch. You guys kind of get the picture where we're drawing some of the lines and we're edge highlighting other ones. And you guys can kind of see I use this kind of stippling motion as well. If you're not super confident with drawing that line, you can kind of do these little dots you can do these little dots, and then you can also come back and paint over all of those little dots, and you're kind of creating your own connect the dots. This is the best way to put it. Here we are actually starting with the wood grain, and we're using pure titanium white, and it is thinned down just a touch. And so the one of the best things that I could really recommend for you guys if you're wanting to paint wood and wood grain is to really take a look at panels of wood. Go to your local hardware store, take a look at some wood, different varieties of wood and wood paneling and fencing and 2x4s and just a bit of everything. And you guys will see that there's a very common structure that runs throughout all of them. And you saw at the beginning there I created a little eyelet, and that's from a branch growing out of a tree, and the tree just kind of continues to wrap itself around that. So you want to create a variety of these little lines, and they make them as thin as you can. That's definitely something that's important. Having a very sharp brush is going to help you do that. What I will try to do as well is I'll make a game out of, if I make two lines that are too far apart from each other, for instance, I'll try to draw one in between them, and that way, we're kind of starting to work on, our mechanical skills, our technical skills of handling the brush, and hopefully that little exercise will help you guys out. You can also see here, again, drawing another eye, working our way around the eye. That's actually not the most technically correct way to do that. The one above in the top left corner is much more, anatomically correct for a tree, whereas the bottom one is not. And of course, this is painting miniatures. We're not going for absolute realism, especially with this type of fantasy miniature, right? We're going for, it looks like it. Another key here is actually to make your lines a little bit thicker. We're going to be painting back over these lines in the second part of the tutorial. That way, if you make the lines a little bit thicker, you can practice even thinner lines on top of those lines that are already there. Okay, and just showing you guys the completed first step. Now, honestly, if you'd like, you could stop there. That's a very nice looking wood. It's definitely, if you're going for a tabletop type of wood, that looks fantastic. But we always like to take it a step further. So we're going to start to use some washes and some inks here to really enhance the color and the depth of these. So here we are using Anthonian Nightshade. This is actually a Citadel color. You guys know I don't commonly use these, but it's just kind of a very nice off green, almost like a camo green type of wash tone. If you have an ink that's very similar, you can thin that down and use that as well. This was just handy, so I went ahead and grabbed it off the shelf. And of course, this is very, very thin, and we're just tinting and glazing it. You want to see almost everything underneath. You don't want this to cover, and you do not want this to pool up. A little bit of pooling is okay in some areas, but not a lot. You need to control it this first round. And so again, just intensifying the effect a little bit. It's always better to thin it down and have to go over the material multiple times to get the desired effect than to rush it, especially if you're going for something that's, a display or competition level, or, it's better to be patient. Here we are using chestnut ink, and again, very, very thin. And essentially what we're doing here is we're just kind of creating a touch of a color contrast. Both of these colors are very desaturated, and having them working in synergy, having this chestnut ink in the shadows and having the Anthonian Nightshade, which is a green tone, kind of as the general tone, it really gives us a very, very, very pretty pop of color. And especially adding in the necrotite green later on, in between everything. So, and here we're just adding a little bit of texture, right? And you can see what I'm doing is I'm adding a few of these dots. And then what we're going to do is we're either going to soak some of them up, we're letting them dry, and we want to create kind of like a ring of color or texture. And here you can see I'm coming in with a Broken Toad size 2 and just kind of soaking it up and dotting it around. You don't want to go too crazy with this. You could almost argue that I went a little bit too far with this particular effect this early in the process, but of course we always continue to work things. So, and then we're doing the same thing with some strong tone from Army Painter just to create another variety of tones. This is kind of like a grayish brown tone. Again, just repeating the process, putting a lot of it down, soaking it back up. It's called a subtractive method. Now we're actually going to be coming back with our titanium white or near titanium white tone, and we're going to be going over a lot of the materials once again. In particular, we are going to be painting back over our wood grain, and the reason that we're doing this is it kind of creates this translucent effect of depth. And if you look at a really, really old wood, and you look at a lot of types of wood, especially ones that have some kind of stain or wash or something like that, you'll really notice that there is a lot of transparency in the wood, and it really makes it look believable, and it really makes it look like it's been worn and used, and something that's it's a very iconic marker of something that's been used quite a bit is that it has a kind of a semi-polished, aged look, and that's kind of what we're going for here. Is that this guy's been using this thing for a long time. He's been putting a lot of fish and critters inside of it, aquatic critters for a long time, and we just really want this wood to look old. A way that you can make wood look newer is essentially by leaving it to the way that we had it earlier in the process. Newer wood, or wood that's been freshly milled, essentially it tends to be a little bit more opaque because it hasn't been worked quite as much. It's more raw. It's less processed, essentially. This is also a very good method of working marble. So if anybody's interested, this can kind of work as a double tutorial for marble and for wood. Marble and wood actually do share quite a lot of properties, especially like with the veining and the transparency and the variety of colors. Of course, marble's going to have a different profile of colors, but it's all about just mixing it up with the colors. The technique stays the same. And so here, kind of what we were talking about before, trying to paint over those previously existing lines. And if the lines change a little bit, that's okay. It gives us more of a variety of texture. Don't be afraid to, if you feel like there needs to be a new line, to add it. It's only going to help you out. Okay, so that's the second round of doing that, and you can see we are already grabbing back into our tints and washes, and we're going to be going back over it. And again, this may seem a little bit excessive because we're just repeating what we just did over again. I do find, though, that for doing display type pieces, it is important to build this contrast. And to build, essentially, you're building in more layers and more textures and more information, and it becomes a matter of, like, you're just working in a lot of information. So again, repeating the process with the Anthonian Nightshade, with the chestnut ink here from Scale 75. We will probably work a little bit of the strong tone in from Army Painter. You can tell as well, I'm having kind of a little bit of a lighter hand with those last couple of washes and glazes. So here's Necrotite Green. We're going to be using this Necrotite Green to wash into the cracks of the wood. There's this octopus in there, and I wanted to kind of give the octopus a little bit of a magical effect, or make the box feel like it was somewhat magical and holding it in. Obviously, the octopus on the other side has broken out, and you can see in his cuts that he's actually bleeding a similar material. And so I wanted the octopus in the box to be somewhat connected, and I really wanted to utilize that color contrast that we had from the chestnut ink to a greater extent, and it really makes this green look fantastic. But the problem with this particular green, and with a lot of light kind of neonish greens like this, is that they actually are, the majority of them is yellow, and so it does create a little bit of a problem, because essentially, when something is yellow, it's not very opaque, and it takes a couple of passes, and you can see here I'm doing multiple passes to really get it to cooperate the way that I want it to. Another way to work around this would be to wash some white initially, and then to wash this over. It does make it look a touch more pastel, though. And here we have the finished box, and you can see it all works very nicely. It matches all the other ones that we had. And also, it really makes the octopus with the orange colors pop. So thank you guys all so much for your support. I know that it's been kind of a crazy time with all the Patreon stuff, or with all the YouTube stuff. Next time we're going to be working on a NMM sword. I will see you guys then, and happy painting. Bye.